I'm told that you're not listening. Some wise women told me you weren't listening. We need the representative from each table to stand up. Everybody else sit down so we know who's representing your table. It can be anybody at the table who wants to present the issues. Okay, so we're starting now. We're starting now. Could people outside please come in? And the person representing your table stand up. So former Councillor Ann Roberts, who's running for council again, is going to present from the electoral reform table, which somehow seems appropriate. And Ann Roberts and I were the one who struck the Women's Task Force. Someone was just bringing it away. In 2005, out of which grew the City for All Women Women's Equality Strategy the city just passed. And Nagin, did you take the other mic? Would you please give it to Ann? Could everyone please be quiet? Everyone, there's a profound person about to speak. A profound woman.
Well, that sets me up. I just wanted, let's go.
Your name and the group you're with.
My name's Ann Roberts, and I'm with the electoral reform table. And as I apologize to our table that I was on council with Ellen when we actually did try to have wards. And as you remember, at that time in the referendum, it was defeated. So that's part of the reason I'm running again, is I'm going to finish that job and get electoral reform in the city. What we came up with at our table are 3 recommendations. The first, the top 3, we came up with many recommendations. Top 3 is that there be a minimum 50% representation of women, not just nominated, not just by the committees, but the actual set aside that 50% women be elected. That's a minimum, 50% or more be elected. The second part is the whole financial situation, which we've all know of women at great disadvantage. Now they have at least put in the spending limits. We have to congratulate the NDP and Green Alliance there that put in the spending limits and contribution limits and limited corporate and all. However, there's a great big loophole where categories of people or organizations, the third party, have no spending limits at all. And they can so totally influence an election. A big loophole that needs to be closed. But we want to go further. We want that government absolutely give each person and provide the advertising, the spending for each person in a campaign. And so then it would be completely equal. And all spending would be limited to that amount. And the third one is we need a ward system. And that minimum, we need a ward system. The city has the power to do that with a simple majority vote. It should happen sooner rather than later. What we're looking at is at least 2, maybe, perhaps, different systems with proportional representation would be preferable. And it could be with things, but what we could do now is have a ward system with 2 people in each ward and require that 1 woman be elected from each ward. So
thank you very much. Let's start to gender intersectional lens. Okay, this table, climate change. Who's going to speak on your behalf?
I will sum us up.
Wendy Lang, the amazing communicator.
Well, we'll see. So we talked about a lot of different topics. Climate change is a pretty big one. But we tried to boil things down into 3 specific recommendations. And we found that the recommendation from the 2014 Hot Pink Paper campaign that we review green policy through an intersectional lens was still relevant, so we kept that one on. Our second one was around parks. So making sure that our parks are more inclusive for women and girls of all ages. And this means providing washrooms, safety features, water refill stations, and lots of spaces for play. And then our third one was around transportation. So part of this is making sure that stations are safe for women, especially at night. And then the other part is increasing service on maybe on major corridors, especially at night, and thinking about when women are coming home from work, when they're going to work, when they're going to do their caregiving duties and things like that. So making sure that we have transit running for them at all times.
We hope that you will give us these sheets, and the 3 points are made obvious to us so we can highlight them, but we will record everything you've given us. Okay, Indigenous women and girls, Ginger. And Laura, two outstanding women who both should be running for election.
We came up with 6 recommendations. The first is, well, actually not the first, but I'll just go in order. So we need to ensure that cities acknowledge that Indigenous peoples that live within the city are residents and deserve to be recognized and supported despite jurisdictional differences, a la Jordan's Principle and the work of Cindy Blackstock, and where there are jurisdictional gaps, to work with federal and provincial governments to ensure that Indigenous peoples do not fall between the cracks. The second is to develop indicators of what Indigenous success, aspirations, and barriers look like. And for that requires meaningful engagement, starting with understanding what that engagement will look like. So not coming to the table with a preconceived notion of what engagement is. And that we would apply these indicators to the education system, to child supports, daycares, and work with the local First Nations, community organizations, and individuals. And that our measure of success will be dependent upon this engagement with Indigenous peoples. We'll also look at ensuring that the funding provided to the downtown east side is equivalent to the gender representation in that community. And for Indigenous women, it's at 40%. But we want to ensure that funding for downtown east side spaces and programs is at minimum 40%. Minimum 40% of all funding to the downtown east side is targeted at women, not just Indigenous women, but women, for programs and spaces. We're also looking at the work of the Vancouver Police Department, and we would like to see an Indigenous Women's Committee as part of the Vancouver Police Department to talk about safety, responses from the police, and identify the unsafe work that is not being addressed. And that this committee have access to a budget, and that they re-examine the Sister Watch program, which needs to be recalibrated so that Indigenous women are running the Sister Watch program in collaboration with the VPD. And there is more. We would also like to see a commitment to housing Indigenous women and families at all life stages, so youth, family, and seniors. Because if we're going to talk about a housing crisis in the city, we'd be remiss to not ensure that Indigenous peoples, especially women, children, and families, and seniors, are provided options across all housing types. Because we're not just Indigenous people living with systemic barriers, and we're not all living with addictions, and we're not all living in poverty. Like, we have our master's degrees, right? Like, we make an income that affords us opportunities to live in housing, but we want to live in housing with our community as well. So we want to ensure that the City of Vancouver has a minimum recognition of Indigenous peoples within the housing mix that is going forward, and that they relook at the urban Indigenous village that was identified in the Grandview Woodlands Plan, which is at the corner of Hastings and Commercial. That's it.
you very, very much, Ginger and Laura. Okay, so we're moving around to housing.
We came up with 4. Sorry about that. We didn't have a chance to word them really well. We're gonna hope to pass that back to Women Transforming Cities to figure out what the kind of specific ask out of it is. But obviously housing is a challenging one to narrow down, among others. So the first of ours was that the city should create a third-party watchdog or some team or body ombudsperson to enforce the standards of maintenance bylaw and residential tenancy rules and strengthen tenant protections. The second was, and this echoes one of the asks from 2014, which are very relevant still, that within their first year of governing, council should develop a plan to end homelessness with adequate funding and an intersectional lens. Our third ask is around vacancy control, that rent increases should be tied to the unit and not the resident, and in particular the tenants union has been articulating that really well, so I'm sure there's some language that we can share from there. And the fourth is committing to making clear that housing is a human right and committing to a definition of affordability.
Thank you very much. Again, make sure you're signed up so you get the next newsletter and you'll find out when the next meeting is to work on these issues. Women, wages and work have to go, so could they be next?
Yes, we can. All right, so I will be the one sharing our key findings, our 3 key findings, even though we were a small group of 3 people, but we came up with a lot of recommendations, but I will focus on just 3 in the spirit of time. You will not be able to read this, so I'm just going to keep it this way anyways.
I just want to say thank you, Jean Swanson, who's walking out the door and running for council.
All right, so our key recommendations are to have a comprehensive pay equity, not just salaries, but benefit packages as well. Ongoing training and monitoring to reduce systemic barriers and to increase the representation of diverse and underrepresented diverse women and underrepresented groups throughout all departments in the city. To design transparent, timely and proportional complaint mechanisms to make it easier for women to complain without fear. And by that I also mean underrepresented groups in general, not just women. Also reports that will portray and increase the accountability, reporting on demographic, the complaint and resolution time as well. To inform students and include human employment rights in educational curriculum of high school students and even planning students, again, so they're aware of these employment rights. Publishing of disaggregated data on job description, demographic, benefit, salaries, not only for city staff, but also for the contractors, knowing who is getting these jobs. Would you like to add anything else?
That was perfect, thank you.
I just want to acknowledge West Coast Leaf, that's ours representing here today, who've done a dynamite letter to all the political parties and raising key issues. Table around violence against women.
We came up with 3 action plans. The first one is to create more hubs for women to seek help and counseling and support, but not just women, people who are non-binary and other cultures as well, creating more hubs in different locations where there are different cultures and they need people who speak the languages there. So language integration, and also just make them more accessible. There are long wait lists for them right now just because they do turn away some people, and so just a lot more inclusive hubs for women. The second one is early education in women's consent and empathy, thank you. Yes. Yeah.
Everybody hear that?
Training women to recognize violence and abusive situations from a young age so that it can maybe be nipped in the butt before it gets to be a long-term problem. The last one is a safety plan that focuses on parks, lighting, and transportation. The, again, 24-hour, 24/7 transportation, an encouragement of 24-hour cafes where women can go to if they just need to kill some time while they wait for a bus, and well-lit parks and bus stops especially, because it's kind of scary waiting at a dark one in a remote part of town. And yeah, did I miss anything?
Catherine Evans is here, who's on Parks Board, and she's running for council, and she put forward a strong motion about safety at special events, which was passed, so thank you, Catherine. Okay, we've got a couple more tables here. Childcare, where are you? Okay.
Thank you. I'm Kate, and I'm with the Coalition of Childcare Advocates of BC. And Ms. Sylvester, you mentioned that we could become a leader in cooperative housing, and I think that Vancouver can also become a leader as part of the universal childcare plan that is, we're on our way, out and rolling. And at our table, we came up with 4 recommendations. The first is to continue to be a leader in promoting the policies and recommendations of the $10 a day plan. Thank you. The second is working with the provincial government to increase public spaces through city land. So putting daycares and parks and schools. We have the space. Let's make use of them. We have safe spaces. Also finding ways to partner public and employers. So working to create quality childcare spaces that allow employers to have that close to their workplace. Use the spaces with big companies. Am I clarifying that? Yeah. And the last and perhaps the most important is at our table we had 2 young women who do not have families yet but have already started that conversation within their families and thinking how incredibly difficult it is to stay in the city and have a family. And I think that we really need to bring those voices into the conversation, not the people who just have children, but the people who are thinking about it, because this is the talent that's leaving the city. So we need to host creative, meaningful discussions about why the young people are leaving because of affordability issues, and how are millennial folks able to attain gender equity when they're just, that conversation's already at a dead end sometimes, it feels like, in families, because how do you do it? So we're really looking forward to seeing how the city's gonna be a part of this monumental shift in this new public system in our province. And thank you.
Thank you very much. The young women's table, is someone here? Is the lady speaking?
She did roll very early. I was not going to speak too early.
She's the youngest board member of Women Transforming Cities, with her mother being there to carry her.
She is. So we had a great conversation, also a small but mighty group. So one of the 2014 recommendations that we think should still be included would be to lower the voting age for municipal elections to 16, or 3.5 months. She might be slightly swayed by my politics still. Also, we had a great discussion about how to support young innovators and the city's role in really making sure that there are hubs, that there are centers, that there are incubators for young people who are in businesses, who are in developing co-ops, social enterprises, how people under 30 are creating jobs in the city, and how can we support them, and to ensure that those programs, that those incubators, that those centers, or whatever they look like, are driven by young people, so that they are not, in the words of one participant, excessively boring. We want them to be exciting and represent the people who participate in them. And then there was also a recommendation that the city implement many, if not all, of the recommendations found in the Youthful Cities report. I don't know this report offhand. It's my understanding that Vancouver is one of many cities chosen to be included in this report, but that some of those policy recommendations would encourage the revision and just rethinking the engagement and processes through which we include young women, and to go beyond just simply having a young woman at the table, but how is the city inviting young women to lead? How are we hiring young female consultants? Are we looking at the different layers of gender? It's not just enough to have one young person or one young woman sitting at a table, but how do we increase that representation, and how do we ensure that young women are driving the conversation?
Thank you. So we did have a breakout session which was called Wild Card, because we felt there was some critical issues not on the table, such as the LGBTQ2IS cis group, which I'm part of as a lesbian. Seniors, another major demographic in the city that is actually lower income level than even youth, according to Andy N. Education, and immigrant and refugee women. Are there any, can we have hands up if you think these 4 issues need to go in hot pink paper? Yes, all? Okay. Any other really pressing issue that we've missed here today?
I think that one of the things that we haven't talked about was the city as a funder and as a grant giver. Because I think we talked about it in terms of the downtown east side, but city gives out grants to a whole bunch of organizations, and they don't have a gendered intersectional lens. And I think and they don't, I heard a statistic from WAVA a while ago that it's a 2-year wait period, to get counseling from when you've, and by that time, after 2 years, you're not gonna go. So we need to talk with the city as granting not only for violence, but for seniors programs and things like that. So I think that actually needs to be part of the whole
Can
paper.
somebody write it up on one of these sheets they're giving us so that it's highlighted? Tanya,
So
also running for nomination for Vision for Council.
yes, that's right. Tanya Paz, yes. So that play on to that would be arts and culture is missing. So other areas that get cut when housing is in a crisis that.
Please put a gender intersectional lens on
Yeah.
your comments.
Yeah, so that's what I was about to do.
Thank you.
I'm in the room with you. I'm not gonna avoid that. And that's what I do throughout my life. We've discussed this before, yes. So everything I do is with an intersectional lens and a gendered lens on it. So I'm talking about women and other intersectionalities in arts and culture. So arts and culture often gets missed when we're talking about funding things, and it's part of what shapes the city, what makes the city, and often arts, culture, music, and sports, women are left out of, or not. Their gifts that they bring in arts, culture, music, including music and sports, is often ignored or not given precedence, so space. Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else?
I don't think that was on.
Margaret, who's also running for a nomination for City Council.
I'm not sure if it was mentioned and I missed it, or maybe it's integrated in a number of the areas that have been addressed, but I work in mental health and addictions. And while I realize that's not necessarily a municipal responsibility exclusively, I really do feel that increasingly it is something that should be highlighted using an intersectional lens. And even if it's to advocate or to lobby or to look at how you can build coalitions, it's really a very important issue, and it's a growing issue. And it's easy for it to get sort of lost in some of the bigger issue topics.
Thank you. Okay, Pretty? Yes, there's one other person.
I just quickly wanted to add that even though we have intersectionality built into it, but the current situation in Vancouver is where racism is really rising around Islamophobia, and there needs to be like a specific focus on that. So what do we do to create safer cities? So I think safety is not just about public safety in other ways, but also about race and how you're targeted when you belong to a faith that may not be the general acceptance. So I think really looking at Islamophobia and what is happening right now in the city as a race issue.
Thank you. And Audrey?
I think that cyber violence against women need to be a separate topic than violence in general, because violence is such a big topic. But cyber violence, like social media is such a strong platform to help empower women for all of these issues. And if women don't feel safe to speak about their issues, then I think that's a problem. With kids, they tell kids don't go on social media, but that's not really an option for adults if they want to get their voices heard.
Thank you very much. You've all been outstanding. I think Nagin, Emily wanted to say a few words. Make sure you're signed up. She inherited a baby. Make sure you're signed up on the list and go online and get onto our newsletter. It's free so that we can let you know when the meeting is, and we will, some of our amazing volunteers and board members will tighten up these things and we'll start to draw up the hot pink paper based on these discussions today.
Sorry, it's working now. I don't know where my list is of all the wonderful contributors, but we'd like to thank all the amazing facilitators at each table. Without you, these breakout groups probably, there's a lot of variety of ideas and thoughts, and it's difficult to bring them back together. Thank you so much, Ellen. So thank you to our facilitators, Christine, Laura and Ginger, Suzanne, Kate and Robin, Marian and Sarah. And thank you to all of our amazing volunteers who spent their Sundays and the days prior to this event putting this together and bringing it to such a wonderful event. Thank you for being present here today, remaining present, and bringing your wonderful thoughts and ideas to actually create some action and create some ripples and waves. And this is going to be great, this election. So thank you all for being here.
And this is for Nagin, who kept this all together, stepped up, and really was incredible. It would not have happened if she had nailed it us all together. Thank you so much. So, Emily, any comments? The behind-the-scene coordinator who has done so much continuously. She's. Any kick-ass words from Tasha, Dion?
Well, Ellen asked me impromptu, of course, to just talk about what I just heard, and I'm not going to run through all of the policy recommendations because there were many. But what I heard is that there are still many suggestions and ideas and issues that are still relevant from the 2014 campaign. And I think that speaks to just how long-standing some of these issues are, and how slow cities move and how slow change happens. And while the city has made some strides, there's certainly more work to do. And the addition of all of these policy key areas that people are listing off at the end just speaks to the need of how we represent the diversity. And it's not just enough to look at gender as an issue, but we really need to start unpacking those layers of oppression that women face through that, I'm gonna throw it out, the intersectional lens, but we really need to take that seriously, and we really need to hold council and mayor to that. So I think from what I'm hearing from all of you and from what I know in my own circles, there's a real desire to dig deeper. It's not just enough to support the issues. It's not just enough for candidates to say, I'm for affordable housing and I'm for childcare. We want to know the how. We want to know what's happening. And when it goes to city staff, we want to know, what does success look like? How are you measuring this? Because it's a policy, a strategy only goes so far as the implementation plan. And if we're not monitoring, if we're not evaluating, and we're not constantly making sure that staff, council is having staff go back and check to see how well the policies and strategies are working, then we're not really going to move ahead any quicker than we have been. I think there's also a desire to rethink the system, so it's really great that we can include women in all of these areas that the city's already doing, but if we're just including women in a process, in a system that's male-dominated, we can only get so far. So let's be open-minded, let's encourage candidates and parties to be open-minded, to change things up, to do things drastically different than they've been doing, and try something new. But above all, I think that I hear from everyone here is there's just a real ambition to push even further. I think it speaks to the social context where women in all their diversity, we're here, we're gaining strength in our voice and our advocacy and our ability to hold people's feet to the fire. So let's continue to do that. Let's work across those party lines to find a way to make sure that this city becomes the most women-friendly city that it can.
And I'd like to remind everyone, there's two surveys that were in your packet. One was for Women Transforming Cities for the Hot Pink Paper campaign, and the other one is related directly to our Status of Women Funded project. It's a demographic questionnaire. There's an informed consent form on the front that you sign, and then the survey is attached. We will separate those two so we can't associate your survey results with the informed consent that you will be signing. If you can leave those at the table as you go out today. Yeah, Ellen says you're not allowed to leave until you do it. We collect this information so that we can say something about the group that was here. So when we are reporting the status of women, we can say, this is something that the characteristics of the group that was here, so we can better interpret the information that we get. So thanks very much for filling that in for us.
I'm doing my master's in community regional planning. Yes.
Thanks for getting that gang of folks here.
Yeah,
Interesting stuff, eh?
I do, yeah.